I've had this Nikon AF-S 16-35 F4G ED VR lens for over 5 years now. And in this long-term review, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on it, as well as showing you some examples of the images I've captured with it while I was traveling around the world. When using my Nikon D850 or D750 for landscape photography, this is my go-to lens for wide-angle shots, which is about 80% of the time. When you first buy the lens, you get the lens itself, front and rear lens caps, a lens hood, and a lens pouch. It weighs around 680 grams and has a minimum focus distance of just 29 centimeters, which isn't too shabby for a wide-angle lens. The two main reasons I bought this 16-35 in the first place was because it was relatively lightweight compared to my Nikon 14-24 f2.8G lens. And it had the ability to use a range of different filters via the 77mm front filter thread. As mentioned, this is my go-to wide-angle f-mount lens for landscape, and the images I've been able to capture with it over the years have been extremely good. Sunrises, sunsets, long exposures. This lens has regularly performed beyond my expectations. I've had this lens in sub-zero temperatures as well as heat waves, and it's performed pretty well considering the punishment I was putting it through. My pros are that it is lightweight, so it makes for the ideal travel companion. It's easy to use. I love the image quality and colors, especially when I've teamed it up with either my Nikon D850 or D750. Can take all my 77mm filters and has an internal zoom which helps substantially in weather sealing. I love its close focusing distance, and the build quality, while not all metal, is good enough for me. The couple of cons I have with this lens is that wide open at f4, the corners aren't the sharpest, but they do improve substantially in sharpness when you hit something like f8. And since I mainly use f8 to f11 in my landscape shots, it hasn't really been an issue for me. The other con is, even though it does have an internal zoom lens, you still get the risk of fine dust particles inside the lens via the front lens element. As you can see, it moves back and forth when changing focal lengths. Now, I simply place an inexpensive 77mm UV filter on the front and have it on the lens at times when I'm not using filters. That solves that issue, plus it gives the lens a little added protection from any potential scratches. And a little tip, if you do buy a UV filter for this lens, make sure it has a slim frame, or you might just run the risk of getting some vignetting in the corners of your photos at 16mm. A couple of fun facts. I've never actually used this lens wide open at f4 because of that corner issue with the softness. Also, in the 5+ years I've had it, I've only used the VR switch on it twice, doing handheld shots in low light. The rest of the time, it just stays in the off mode. Why? Because 99% of the time, my shots are on a tripod where the lens is sitting on my D850 or D750. I guess having that VR capability is a nice have in case you ever do need it, but I literally never use it, and at the end of the day, it only gives you an added 2.5 stops of image stabilization. I'm lucky in that I own both the Nikon 16-35mm and 14-24mm lenses. I've already mentioned why I prefer the 16mm over the 14-24 with regards to weight and filters. I mainly use my 14-24mm today for things like astrophotography due to its wider aperture, and it's also the lens I use in my YouTube studio on my D750. Oh, and FYI, the 16-35mm lens is substantially cheaper than the 14-24mm, so if you are considering which lens to buy, take that into consideration if your cash budget is tight. I'm currently testing out this 16-35mm on my Nikon Z7 via the FD-Z2 adapter and putting it up against my Z 14-30mm f4 lens in landscape photography situations. So as soon as I have some results from that, I'll be sharing those with you in another video. So make sure you subscribe and keep your eyes open for that vid. Well, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the review of the Nikon 16-35 f4 VR lens. Never stop creating, and I'll see you next time.